Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for our second external insights exchange as part of the Ideas 42 Academy. I'm Mitra Salasal. I'm the Director of Communications at Ideas 42, and I'm pleased to be joined today by my teammate, Nikki Cohen, who's a Senior Associate at Ideas 42. She's going to talk to us a little bit today about one of our projects applying behavioral design to hand washing habit formation in Peru. It looks like we have a few more people who are joining, so we'll give them just a couple more seconds before I hand it off to Nikki. And while we are waiting, just a little bit of housekeeping. For those of you who maybe missed our inaugural Insights Exchange a couple weeks ago, we do have a lot of interesting information to share with you. So please share your questions through the chat box on the Zoom feature. And we have held some time at the end of Nikki's presentation to answer them in real time. So please drop them into the chat box throughout the presentation. We'll take a look at them, and Nikki will answer them towards the end. Great. So it looks like we are all set. And with that, I will hand it off to Nikki.
Great. Thanks, Mitra. So before we launch into the presentation, I want to demo for all of you a game that we designed as part of our intervention relating to hand washing. So Mitra, thank you for being my brave volunteer. Would you please put on this eye mask?
Oh, happy to.
Thank you. So Mitra does not know what is in this cup. It could be anything, really. So Mitra, I'm going to guide your hands, and I'd like you to put them in the cup all the way in, maybe one at a time, and really mush around in there.
Okay.
Yeah. Try to get your hands really covered in whatever substance is in this cup.
This is not pleasant, just in case those of you watching cannot tell. Okay.
Great, and you can take them out, and I have a Kleenex right,
great.
So you don't get anything on your pants. So before I allow you to maybe clean off your hands, I'm just curious. I have a cookie off screen here. Would you like to eat it?
Unless you're going to feed it to me, no, thank you.
Okay, and if I said that I'd really like to shake your hand because I just love working with you, how would you feel?
I think that I would have to politely decline, Nikki.
Okay, great. Okay, you can let me hand you actually these wipes, and then you can take off the eye mask.
Awesome. Yes, my hands feel pretty gross. I would very much like to wash them.
So once you have the eye mask off.
Sorry. Okay. Okay, how am I doing here?
Your hands look pretty clean.
Okay, great.
Normally she would wash her hands with soap and water, but given the mic situation. Okay, so Mitra, how did you feel when I asked you to put your hands into a cup with a mystery substance in it?
Well, I trust you, Nikki, but otherwise a little bit unsettled, not so sure what's going to come up, and it was gross feeling.
It was gross feeling, yeah. What about the thought of, eating a cookie or shaking hands with somebody?
That was not high on my list of desires after putting my hand in the cup. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for your demonstration.
Of course.
So we'll start with the slides. Thank you, Liana. So great. So today, clicker is not working.
Pardon the technical difficulties. All right.
Okay. Now,
oh, great.
Great. Okay. So today I'm going to be talking about this project in Peru on hand washing, as Mitra said. Before that, I'll give a little background on behavioral science for those who aren't familiar. And the game really ties in, as I said, it's part of the design that we came up with and piloted in Peru. And so I would like you all to kind of hold on to those feelings of disgust and discomfort that you heard Mitra express. Those are going to come back up again. Great, so we did the game. So just taking a step back, for those of you who aren't familiar with Ideas 42 or with behavioral science, we are a nonprofit behavioral design lab. We're really working at this intersection between psychology, economics, and designed to try to solve social problems. So we were founded as an academic research lab at Harvard back in 2008 by some behavioral economists who saw that they were really discovering some interesting things in their lab work and field work about how people make decisions and take action in the real world that they thought could actually help people solve some social problems, like in financial inclusion, people who want to save money and don't manage to; in health, people who want to lose weight or go to the gym but don't manage to. So that was our beginning. And what is behavioral science? It's really trying to answer this question of who are we as humans? Who are we really? And program designers and policymakers sometimes think about human beings as if we are somewhat like this character, Spock. So Spock is very rational, very logical, always carefully weighs his options before acting. And when we design programs and policies in this way, we're certainly not designing for the human element. We have low take-up, people don't understand the options, etc. So that's one end of the spectrum. And then sometimes, you might be tempted to think that, well, maybe human beings are a little bit more like Homer Simpson. We're lazy, indulgent. We don't think about the long term, we think about the short term, or perhaps we're always just seconds away from being distracted by a donut. And certainly that can be true in certain situations, but we at Ideas 42 in behavioral science, we think we're really more like the people in this photo, where most of the time we are thinking about the long-term, our long-term benefits, our long-term wellness. We can make good decisions like investing in our health by going to the gym, but sometimes we get a little bit sidetracked. We might automatically take the escalator without thinking. We're there to burn calories, the stairs are right next to it, but the cue is to go up the escalator. We saw someone else go up it. Maybe it was a tiny bit closer to our car, and we take the easy way out, even though we're there to actually exercise. So that's really where we're coming from in the behavioral sciences. And just to give a little bit more detail on that, you might think that people make decisions and actions in a fairly linear or straightforward way. So let's say that I want to eat healthy, and my options for lunch are a salad and a pizza. And so the decision might be something like, do I want to eat healthy? Yes. So my action is eat the salad, and then I eat the salad, and it's as simple as that. When in fact, we think it's a little bit more complicated. We think that there are these factors in the environment that are very strongly influencing our decision. It's not simply I make this decision to be healthy and I follow through on it. I might ask myself, well, was I already good today? Maybe I deserve the mac and cheese from Dig In, which is really quite good. What is everybody else doing? What's everybody else eating? There are all these other factors about our environment, and also about the way that our brains work, these mental shortcuts that we take that interact with our environment to lead to a certain behavior or another behavior. And so this is really the underpinning of all of our work. With that, I'm going to launch into the hand washing intervention. So first, why does hand washing matter? So diarrheal and respiratory illnesses cause suffering or death for millions of children around the world. Here in wealthy countries, we're lucky to think of diarrhea and colds as just a passing, an annoyance, right? But globally, diarrhea and pneumonia are the top 2 causes of child death, causing millions of deaths around the world. And in Peru, where we were working on this project, more than 60% of children under 5 suffer from diarrhea each year, which actually leads to over 1,000 deaths. So these issues, these illnesses are really fatal for many around the world. And hand washing is a very effective way to combat these illnesses. Some people like to call it the do-it-yourself vaccine. So, hand washing prevents 40% of diarrheal illnesses and 25 to 50% of respiratory illnesses. It takes 20 seconds, and it's relatively inexpensive and widely available. So Mr. Hanky, the Christmas poo, he's representing fecal matter, which we have on our hands and is on all the surfaces around us, maybe not all the surfaces, but he can be defeated pretty easily by just simply superhero soap and water. And yet, as you all know, people don't wash their hands properly all the time, and sometimes people don't wash their hands at all. So there was a observational study done in Peru on caregivers of young children, and they found that only 1 in 5 caregivers was washing their hands after using the bathroom, and that the rates of hand washing were even lower for these other critical moments like feeding a child or preparing food. But it's really not just Peru, it's a problem everywhere in the world. So the global rate of hand washing after using the bathroom is 20%. It's Peru is pretty much average in the world in that sense. And, a very quick Google turned up these headlines in the US, only 5% of bathroom users in Michigan, in one Michigan study, were washing their hands correctly, or doctors who know they're being watched are much more likely to wash their hands than when they don't know they're being watched in California. And just show you what I mean, what was really under this clickbait headline. Well, this was a study where some researchers trained students to unobtrusively observe people's hand washing behavior in public places, in restaurants and bars and libraries and places like that. So people, didn't think they were being watched, right? Or at least ideally, they didn't think they were being watched. And about 1 in 10 didn't wash their hands at all. 1 in 3 no soap. And the average duration of hand washing was 6 seconds, which is about a third of what the CDC recommends if you actually want the soap to remove the germs from your hands. So that's pretty gross. And I don't think that people in Michigan are unique. I think this is true around the US and around the world, that we're really not doing a great job washing our hands. What do we know from the literature about how to increase hand washing? Well, traditionally, public health experts have been focused on building knowledge, really helping people understand germ theory. Why do they need to wash their hands? When should they wash their hands? And how should they wash their hands? So even as recently as 2009 to 2012, there were these big scaling up communications campaigns that were done through mass media, really using every kind of communications toolkit that we have to try to get this message out there and build people's knowledge. And what they found is that they were able to increase people's knowledge about when to wash their hands and why to wash their hands. They were also able to increase the availability of soap, so whether people had soap in their bathrooms, and self-reports of hand washing. However, there was no increase in actual observed hand washing from these studies. So it seems like knowledge is a necessary component, but not sufficient. And you might have, this is something we say a lot at Ideas 42 and in behavioral science. This is something we find everywhere in financial health, in all the domains in which we work in sustainability. So it's really not unique to hand washing, but knowledge may be the first step, but if we focus on building knowledge, we're not going to arrive at the behavior. So even when people know that germs are invisible and that they can live on your hands and that hand washing can get rid of these germs, we don't see this behavior of really proper hand washing. So why doesn't this work? Well, hand washing is really tricky. It's hard to change from a behavioral perspective. So for one thing, it's automatic. We're not consciously thinking about our hand washing, right? It's kind of a reflex. We do it or we don't do it. And that means that it's really hard for us to change this habit. It's hard for System 2 to monitor it and change it. And for those unfamiliar, System 2 is a way of thinking about our mind. You may have heard of it in Thinking Fast and Slow, the book by Daniel Kahneman, where basically he proposes that our minds operate on 2 different levels. There's System 1, which is fast, automatic, intuitive, and there's System 2, which is what we use when we're solving a math problem. It's reflective, it's deliberate, it's logical and thoughtful. And because hand washing is automatic, it makes it hard for System 2, which is the system that learns about germ theory, to go in and change that habit. Hand washing is also private, or usually semi-private, which means it's hard to apply social norms. You don't get any feedback when you're washing your hands. So this occurs at a few levels. First of all, germs are invisible, right? So you don't know if you've done a good job washing your hands. And then there's also this time lag between having dirty hands and getting sick, whether it's you getting sick or someone you care for getting sick, which makes it difficult to draw the causal link between I didn't wash my hands and I got sick. So it's really hard to have a moment of reflection of, well, wow, I really need to wash my hands because it led to me getting sick, because that feedback loop just isn't there. And finally, there are no consistent contextual cues. And this is because we need to wash our hands before certain activities, such as before eating or cooking, and after other activities like using the bathroom or changing a diaper if we're the caregivers of young children. And we might need to do these activities in many places, at home, but also around town, at work, plenty of different places, which makes it hard to use reminders. You couldn't just send a text message at 10 in the morning to remind people to wash their hands. That's not that's not the right moment for everybody. So these are some of the reasons why, from a behavioralist perspective, hand washing is so tricky to change. However, there have been a few creative studies that really inspired us that have been quite successful at encouraging hand washing. So I want to explain a few of those. The first was in Pakistan in 2006, and it was a communications campaign, but it was extremely intensive. So it lasted 9 months, and it included household visits twice a week by field workers who were from the community. It was done in a squatter settlement, and it also included free soap. And so this extremely intensive, twice weekly over almost a year did lead to significant reductions in diarrhea. And this is a snapshot from the Super Ama project, which was also intensive. It wasn't intensive as it wasn't 9 months, but it was 4 days spread out over a few weeks of village-based and school-based activities like skits and films and public pledges that were grounded in what the researchers called emotional drivers. So what they thought was, telling people about germs is really not getting anybody to change their behavior. We need to get them at a deeper level, at an emotional level. And so they highlighted things like nurture, the desire for a parent to have a healthy and thriving child, or disgust, the thought of having poop or fecal matter on your hands, affiliation, this idea that we want to fit in and do what others are doing. And you may have noticed that these actually fit quite nicely with what we would call behavioral drivers, or with psychology. So this was a really great experiment, and they also saw huge increases in hand washing that actually persisted at least a year. And many studies that in the hand washing world don't actually measure anything after the intervention is really over. So this is unique in that we saw that the effects lasted, quite a long time. And I should also just explain, Super Ama means super mom, and she's, so all of the kind of materials in this campaign are framed around the super mom. She's super great, clean, nurturing. She's everything that a mom might want to be and that a kid might want to have in a mom. And she's kind of contrasted against this hilariously grotesque character who's very dirty. For example, they have a skit for children where they do a cooking competition, and Super Ama shows up to make food for the children, and she's just washed her hands, and she's explaining her methodology, and then the gross character shows up. He's overweight. His clothes are all sweaty and stained. He has sand in his bowl, and he mentions that he's coming from the bathroom. That's why he's late. He had diarrhea and he didn't wash his hands. And then he kind of goes into the crowd and tries to shake the hands of the children. And so they really leveraged this disgust idea, this humor idea. We were really inspired by that and wanted to incorporate some of those elements into our design. And finally, I want to talk about Hope Soap. So these are images of the Hope Soap that are on the screen here. They're child-size bars of soap. So, they fit nicely into a child's hand. They're colorful and they have a toy inside. And if you use the soap until you get to the end of the soap, you can have the toy. And so these were incorporated into an existing in-home education program, and they were found to increase rates of hand washing among children. And there were also spillover effects in that the parents were also washing their hands more, and also reduced incidences of illness. So these are some of the studies we pulled from the literature that were effective, that we thought were really creative, and that we wanted to try to incorporate into our work. So what's the behavioral approach we took? What did we do? So first, this work is part of a larger project called Volar and led by Aporta. They are the social impact arm of the BRICA group, which is a large private conglomerate in Peru. They have many companies. They have a mining company, who sponsored this project, Minsur. They also had fisheries, health insurance, health clinics, painting company, you name it, they've got it. And Volar as a project is focused on early childhood development, dual focus areas. One is cognitive development, which we worked on as well, but due to time, I won't be able to talk about today. And the other is hygiene and sanitation. And along the bottom, you see the faces of the Ideas 42 folks who worked on this project. It was not just me. So what did we do? Well, like many of our projects, we started out with a literature review, some of the highlights of which I just shared. Then we did some behavioral mapping, which is a methodology we use to very carefully identify every decision and action that might be relevant for the behavior of interest, and then methodically try to understand what are the cognitive biases that might be relevant at each of these moments, and how might they interact with people's environments to lead to the behavior that we want to see or don't want to see. And so we usually come out of this exercise with anywhere between 50 and hundreds of hypotheses about what are the barriers to the behavior, or what might encourage the behavior. And these hypotheses were used to inform interview guides in some early foundational field work that we did, interviewing folks in Peru. We were working in Puno, which is a mountainous region, and in this kind of rural village in the mountains. And I should say that at this particular moment, we partnered with the Universidad del Pacífico, with an academic working there, to run this part of the project. So we actually did not conduct these interviews, but we oversaw the process and the interview guides. And so they did over 100 interviews with caregivers of young children, with community members, and also home observations. And we took the results of that exercise, and they fed into the identification of 4 major behavioral barriers that we thought were getting in the way of proper hand washing. We took these barriers and they informed a bunch of different design ideas, which we then usability tested over 2 visits with about, again, 100 different folks in Peru. And eventually we landed on 3 pilot designs that were included and tested in an operational capacity in the fall of last year. So what do I mean when I say a behavioral barrier? What are the behavioral barriers that we found? Well, first, we found that people have kind of a faulty heuristic about when and how to wash their hands. So a heuristic is a rule of thumb that helps me make a decision very quickly in the world, which is complex, and my brain is always taking in tons of information. So we use heuristics all the time. Just as an example, I might have a heuristic that, if they're going to charge me more than $2 for the guacamole add-on, I don't include it. But if it's less than $2, maybe I do when I'm at Chipotle, for example. In this case, people seem to be relying on a heuristic that if their hands are not visibly dirty, then they don't really need to be washed. We also heard that, if I need to wash my hands, if they don't look clean, then perhaps I just need to rinse them under water or wipe them on my clothes. That's enough to clean my hands. There was also a pretty prevalent mental model that attributed illness to non-microbial causes. So other popular folk theories like the cold contributing to or causing illness would lead people to not really pay as much attention to germs and germ theory, right? There was also a lack of feedback. So as I mentioned, in general with hand washing, it's hard to draw the causal link between I didn't wash my hands and I got sick, and we don't know if we've done a good job washing our hands because germs are invisible. So there's really no cue to kind of pause and consider, reflect on changing our hand washing habits. And finally, there are some hassles to access clean water. So in the region in which we are working, the water is not always on. The water's not running through the pipes 24/7, and many people store water in large buckets outside of their home in a kind of exterior courtyard, meaning that there may not be a sink in the bathroom or near the bathroom, or the kitchen the water may not be running when I need to begin cooking. So there are some extra structural hassles to really accessing clean water at those critical moments. So these barriers, as I mentioned, are what we really built our design around. We also wanted to incorporate these elements from the literature review, from what we found to be successful in past interventions. So just to give you a few examples of how we combined what we saw as a barrier or something in the local context with the lit review finding, I have a few examples here. So, we saw that people aren't prompted to reconsider their hand washing habits. And we know from broader literature on habit formation that in order to create a new habit, you both need to create the intention to change your behavior, and then you need ongoing support. And so that's why our design included an event that was really intended to create this intention, followed by reminders in the home, which were meant to support the ongoing reinforcement of this new habit. Another example, there we see that there aren't any salient consequences of not washing your hands. And we saw from the Super Emma project that emotional drivers can be really powerful. So we actually did adapt that cooking competition skit into our community event to really emphasize to people that there is actually a consequence of not washing your hands. You can be perceived as gross by the community if you are carrying around dirty hands. One of the barrier of people wiping their hands on their clothing or just rinsing underwater, plus this idea that disgust can actually be a very powerful motivator to enforce social rules, led us to create several other fun and gross games, including the one that I demonstrated with Mitra earlier, to really give people a moment to pause and reflect and think, okay, I may not be able to see the disgusting things on my hands, but they're there, right? And I may be passing it on to my neighbor. I may be eating it. So that was the intention with those games. And finally, we saw that in the community in which we were working, events were a really great way to reach people. And so this is because digital channels are a little bit difficult there. Literacy is not that high. Internet connectivity is not great, right? So email and text, some things we might typically consider not really appropriate. So an event was a great way to reach people. And we know that if we provide some kind of small or mini incentive, it might attract even more people to come to the event. It might help them, it might encourage them to stay at the event. And so then we had from the Lit Review, we had the Hope Soap study with the toy soap. And we know from this idea of the IKEA effect, it's this idea that we value or like things that we ourselves have made. We kind of combine that together into a soap making workshop as part of our community event, where people actually made the Hope Soap. They chose the toy, they chose the color and the scent, and they made soap. I want to pause and just mention that we do see usability testing as really critical. So usability testing is where we take prototypes of our designs, we go out to the field and we see how people react to them. This image is from the Super Amma work, and it was used as a reminder for people to kind of post up over their sinks. It's a reminder to wash their hands. You might be familiar with it because it's been used in tons of different studies. It's called like the eyes watching over you effect. And the idea is that people who see, the idea is that when this is posted in people's field of vision, it makes them feel watched, and it tends to encourage altruistic or it tends to encourage altruistic behavior. So we thought that this might be an interesting idea, and we did include it in our first user test, but we saw that people really didn't know what it was. There was no sense that this meant someone was watching me. People were just really, really confused by this image, and so we dropped it early on. So what are the designs? What did we come up with? So one is this community event I've been talking about called the Feria, the goal of which was to really create and reinforce this intention to wash hands. So it had the soap making workshop, which I mentioned, some games. So here's a woman playing the mystery hands game that I played with Mitra, and a hand washing demo, so that after you've put your hands in this very disgusting cup, you can actually feel the satisfaction of having clean hands, and also have an education moment if needed for our implementers to explain all the proper steps in hand washing and the critical moments, et cetera, a moment to focus on the knowledge aspect. There were two other components to our Feria that we couldn't test due to operational reasons, but just to explain, one was the cooking competition skit that I mentioned earlier, and the last was a game of tag that was meant to engage slightly older children who maybe wouldn't have been as excited about the soap making. And so it's a version of freeze tag in which one child is designated as the poop child, and then poo-poo, and they have a poop emoji sign that they wear, and then there's the sort of like soap or doctor child. This may be a version of something you're familiar with. So the poop child runs around and tries to infect others. When they're infected, they have to freeze, and then the doctor or the soap can come around saving people, and when they save them, they have to rub their hands together before they can move again, right, to mimic the idea of hand washing. And this was, in early tests, appeared to be a lot of fun for kids to play. But yeah, again, due to operational reasons, we had to drop that one. Another component of the design were commitments and a hand washing station. So these commitments were public commitments that health workers and restaurant workers would wear, so like a name tag, as well as informational posters that could be put up in the restaurants to indicate their commitment to hand washing. So like a public pledge sort of idea. And some of them are kind of funny, like this one, which is like, I'm not dirty, like I'm not a pig. I always wash my hands. And some of them were a little more straightforward, just, you know, I always wash my hands. And we let people pick the one that they wanted. We also included a hand washing station, a permanent installation of a hand washing station in the plaza in the center of the village. And the last component of the design was a home reminder kit. So these were stickers to be put up in the home. The one on the left says, we wash our hands before eating, and it could be put up in the kitchen. The one on the right says, we wash our hands after changing the diaper, and it could be put up, you know, in the near wherever the diaper changing happens. So the idea again here is to really support the habit formation with visual cues in the home that remind people to wash their hands after they've already been exposed to these messaging and events that help to create and shore up that intention. So I want to share some results from the pilot. So as I mentioned, that this was conducted late last year. It was in Nuñoa, a small village in the mountainous region of Puno. We had about 50 people attending the Feria, and then outcomes were measured at baseline, before the Feria, and at endline through a survey of about 40 caregivers. I should say that Aporta, our partner, had a few other water-related interventions that they conducted at the same time. So these results are not just due to the Feria and the commitments and the stickers, and they also included some other workshops. But the results were quite promising from this initial survey. So diarrheal episodes decreased from 23% to 5%, respiratory infections decreased from 60% to 26%, and caregivers who were observed washing their hands properly, so a structured observation, they know they're being watched, increased from 70% to 90%. Again, I just want to give a really big caveat that this should be taken as kind of anecdotal, qualitative type evidence. This was not a very rigorous survey design or evaluation design. And as I said, there were several other interventions going on at the time. But these numbers, I think, speak for themselves, that, you know, there is something promising in what in the ensemble of what Aporta has done in this region. There are some significant challenges. So one of the survey measures we had designed at baseline, we wanted to know whether people thought that other people are washing their hands, right? We wanted a measure of this kind of implied a descriptive norm. Do I think my neighbors wash their hands? And so we had a question that was something like, in your opinion, how many adults in this neighborhood wash their hands with soap at critical moments? And people reacted really poorly. They were uncomfortable. They didn't want to answer this question. And I think we tried several different reframings of the same idea and could not arrive at a way of asking this question that wasn't perceived as offensive. And so we had to drop that one. And then the commitments and the home reminder kit, we learned, had very low utilization. So even though our implementation team visited, 10 or 11 restaurants in the village, which it's a small village, so that's probably all the restaurants that are there, and convinced them to take the name tags, to put them on, to hang the posters. When they went back a week later, none of those materials were still visible. And similar experience with the home reminder kits, where about half of the households that were visited as part of a separate sanitation-related home health visit agreed to let the home health worker put up the stickers. And the other half said, I'll do it later. And when they came back for the endline visit, none of the stickers were still up. And so I think this shows, we did miss the mark here. The way that these commitments and stickers were implemented did not resonate with people. Maybe they thought they were ugly. Maybe they were embarrassed. We don't know. More work remains to be done. And I'll just add that Aporta is planning to revamp and try again with some of these designs in the very near future. They have a partnership with TASA, one of their subsidiary companies, which is a fishery company, and they're planning to try out the commitments design element in a very different context in which people have a really strong identity tie to TASA, to that company. And so they're hoping that people would be really excited about wearing a TASA branded name tag, and that might encourage people to continue to wear something like the name tags. So some future directions. So I think a lot of questions still remain after this project. One of the main ones that we've been asking ourselves is, how much foundational research is really needed to adapt effective interventions into a new context? Do we really need 2 usability testing visits with over 100 interviews? Do we need to start out with those 100 interviews in the foundational period? I think we could probably do less, right? But how much less and still have an effective intervention? I think that's one big open question. Another question relates to technology. How could technology provide the missing feedback about when our hands are dirty? And so this screenshot is from an article, a journalist who was exploring the use of this technology that it's a gel you put on your hands and it mimics the way that germs stick to your hands. So the top left is when she has just put the gel on and hasn't done anything. So the light blue represents germs. Dark blue means clean. And she's basically taking a photo under a UV light of different stages of hand washing. So the top middle box is the rinse and shake. So just very quick rinse and shake. I think we've all seen somebody do that in the bathroom. It did not really seem to change the amount of germs on her hands very much. Top right is 6 seconds under just water. We see a little bit of improvement, right? But still plenty of germs there. The bottom left box is 6 seconds with soap. The bottom middle, 15 seconds with soap, which is the minimum that the CDC and other organizations recommends. And the bottom right is 30 seconds with soap. And I'll just point out that her nail beds still look quite dirty, right? And so I think that this technology could be really helpful in training for people who want to wash their hands correctly, right? It could be a mechanism to see, am I doing a good job or not? What am I missing? And that's something that's just missing today. And I think that technology can also play an interesting role in helping with measurement in these studies. So as you've seen in these studies and are probably aware, when people know they're being watched, they behave differently than when they think they're not being watched. And we're really limited in these studies in how we can observe people's true behavior when they're not being watched. And so I think technology can be a huge addition to the way that we're able to measure effectiveness of these interventions, perhaps with motion sensors, with soap dispensers that automatically count the number of times that they're being used. And some of this has already made its way into interventions. In the UK, for example, there was a study using sensors on hand soap dispensers in public restrooms on the highway, for example. But I think that this holds a lot of promise for helping the field move forward. And then there's one more question that's really on my mind personally, which is I would like to know when we're going to get foot pedals in public restrooms. So we all have heard people say that the faucets or the bathrooms themselves in public are quite dirty, and maybe some people don't want to touch the faucet to wash their hands, right? And I think foot pedals could be a creative solution that allows us to wash our hands in public without having to touch the faucet, without having to touch the door handle or the trash can, right? Those are all areas where I think we could really use some foot pedal innovation. So that's my own personal view. So just to conclude, hand washing rates around the world, dismally low despite generally high knowledge and accessibility. The context around hand washing makes it really tricky to change. So even though public health experts have been putting all this effort into it, because it's so tricky, because it's automatic, because it's private, it's really it's a behavior that's hard to move. However, behavioral science is a valuable additive lens that can strengthen other health behavior change interventions. And if you know any public bathroom designers, I would love to have a conversation about foot pedals. Yeah, so that's it. I think we can do the Q&A.
Yeah, so if you have any burning questions, please share them now. All right, let me see what we've got. Hold on one second. Okay, it looks like we do have some questions in here. Actually, All right, so do you know how well the hand washing station was utilized in the town square?
No. So I'll say our results came in 2 days ago. They just wrapped up the end line, and we had a very quick call with our team in Peru on a very bad connection. So I didn't ask about that, but great question, and I will check into it.
Great. Any other questions from everyone on the call? All right, well, that was easy and simple. Oh, looks like we got one. Did you find that any of your interventions were more effective than others?
So we know that utilization was really low for the commitments and the stickers components. So I would say, at least initially, those are going to need a lot of work if we want them to be effective components. I think right now our going hypothesis is that the Feria, the community event, was the really driving factor behind those results. But I think more testing is really needed.
Great. Did the soap making workshop include putting a toy in the soap?
Yes, it did. So the way that it worked, and we demoed it in the office as well, just to try it out before we took all these materials to Peru to try to do it. But the way it works is you basically heat up a soap base, and then you pour it into molds. And so we had a bowl of different toys, animals, cars, etc., that the children or the parents could pick from the bowl, put into the mold, and then pour the soap. And I think my understanding is, for operational reasons, the implementer on our side, the Aporta team member, is the one who was actually pouring the soap base and like heating the soap base. But he did allow people to choose their toy and to choose the color. And there was also a nice essential oil scent to really make hand washing as kind of pleasing and reinforcing as possible, kind of in the same way that mint was added to toothpaste, you may or may not know, in America, to get people to brush their teeth. And I think we can all see why that has helped to create and sustain this habit. And so we tried to use something similar with a nice scent in the soap.
Great. So the questions are starting to roll in now. Here's an interesting one. How does using hand sanitizer compare to washing your hands?
Yeah, so I'm not a public health expert, let me just say that. My understanding from reading CDC and other experts' opinions on this is that if soap and water is available, it's really the most effective. If not, hand sanitizer is a great backup. I think hand sanitizer is not as effective if you have kind of chunks of something on your hand, right? Like Mitra did with what the mystery substance that I'm not going to tell you what it was. But my understanding is hand sanitizer is a great option when you don't have soap and water. But if you have the option, you should use soap and water.
Great. Yes, I'm thinking right now that hand sanitizer would not make my hands feel clean. And then there's somewhat of a follow-up question. I also sometimes hear the theory, quote, if you wash your hands too much all the time, you wash away even the good germs that help build your immune system. Is there any research to combat that theory?
So great question. It's something I personally wonder. I've thought about a lot during this project. And I think that the research is still in its infancy in understanding microbiomes and the relationship between bacteria in our guts and on our skin, everywhere, with our well-being. However, what I will say is that in Peru, in these rural areas where we're working, the hand washing rates are so low that we know that there's a net health benefit to not being at risk for diarrheal and respiratory illnesses. So there's really a clear use case to wash your hands at every critical moment when you're exposed to fecal matter from animals, etc. Yes, 100% wash your hands then. Whether or not in sort of suburban Chicago where I grew up, I've washed my hands too frequently, going between, I don't know, the kitchen and the living room in my own home. I think that there are some questions that remain to be answered about that. So I don't have the answer to that one, and I actually think it's a really important direction for future research.
Okay. Another question about broader research. Has there been any research looking into the stickiness of hand washing interventions, and what has been most effective in making habit change persist over time?
Great question. So as I alluded to, most of the studies in hand washing have measurements that are really short term. we really don't know, because it's expensive and it's hard to do long-term measurement. So in the communications campaigns that I cited, I think it's very uncommon in the literature to find anything that goes beyond like that day or that week or, that moment, right? The Super AMA was an exception to that, where they measured it 6 months after the intervention and a year after the intervention and found that the effects persisted. That's the only data point I really have top of mind. But again, this is, I think, a place where the field really needs to go, right? Because in order for hand washing to be effective, you don't just have to do it today, you have to make it a habit for life. So again, I wish I knew the answer.
How much was the community involved in developing the aspects of the project that drew on social norms? And follow up to that, how much do you think that this helped or hurt the intervention's effectiveness?
Yeah, so the community was involved through our initial foundational research that we did to understand the barriers to hand washing. And then they were also involved in those usability tests once we had prototypes of designs. And we often sort of wrapped up our interviews by asking, what other ideas do you have on this topic? Do you have any thoughts on ways to encourage people in your community to wash your hands? So it's certainly something we seek out and we want to incorporate. So that was a major part of our methodology. What was the second part of the question?
How much did this help or hurt the intervention's effectiveness?
Hard to say.
Yeah. So before I ask the last burning question that I'm personally really invested in on this list, we do have one more. How did you select which toys to include in the soap?
We did rely on our local partners quite a bit for what would be appropriate. I think initially I purchased like a Animals of South America toy kit from Amazon, and that was our starting point. And then I think we kind of continued on that theme, choosing animals that would be animals and toys that would be like shapes that would be familiar to people in the region.
Great. So the burning question that I'm very personally invested in is, what was the mystery substance? I promise I did not throw that in there.
Today Mitra was treated to a mixture of mashed up banana and salsa.
It's great.
The other half of the banana I ate in my breakfast.
Wonderful. Yes, I can certainly attest to the fact that there was salsa present. Okay, does anyone have any final questions for Nikki before I can go and wash my hands? All right, I'll give it a couple more seconds. It looks like that's it. So thank you to all of us for joining us today for our second ever Insights Exchange. And like I said before, I am very excited to go and finally wash my hands. I wanted to share with you a couple of our upcoming Insights Exchange installments on two very salient problems. On March 17th, we'll be sharing some information about our climate adaptation work. And on April 23rd, we will be talking about our work to increase voter turnout. We also have upcoming crash courses in behavioral science workshops that are coming up. If you're interested in spending a day with us and learning much more about the basic principles of how to apply behavioral science in your own work and in your own life, the next one is February 27th in Washington, D.C. And we do have one following that, March 19th in New York. You can visit ideas42.org/academy to learn about our Insights Exchanges, crash courses, and all of our other really exciting ways to learn more and more about how to apply behavioral science. And sign up for individual Insights Exchange or an annual subscription. We will be emailing a recorded version of this presentation to you very soon, so look out for that in your inbox. And with that, we will say thank you to Nikki and thank you to all of you for joining us.